You have to be completely empty. Mushin is the way, right? So that's number one, right? So there's an idea that you have to be empty, right? And clear, and just let whatever's inside you express itself naturally, autonomously, fluidly. Just something to be aware of when it comes back to talents, right? If you've got a certain draw to a certain direction, listen to that, right? If you ignore it, you're ignoring your true higher self, your true authentic higher self. That's, I think, the key to his brilliance, the key to his excellence. And I don't think I've ever really described that until this podcast.
Welcome to another Martial Mind Power podcast. I'm Jatinder Palaha with co-host Sifu Lak. And today we're going to be dropping some more wisdom bombs. But as always, Sifu Lak, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Life is good. All is well. How about you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Good. Thanks. Lots of changes happening recently, isn't it? You know, with, you were sharing earlier on about, kids going off to uni and change of season and all these kind of things. So it's interesting times at the moment, right?
Most certainly. My oldest is just flew the nest, as they say, and it's been an interesting one. We've always prepared her to spread her wings and allowed her to, if I was to use the word, flap away. But now she's actually flown the nest, and it's been an interesting period last couple of weeks. But one to also test your own emotional resilience as well, your own spiritual resilience. Want to really not test the faith, because faith is not something that should be tested. It should just be there, but just rest in that. Knowing that, they're going to be fine. They're going to be all right. There's something bigger than us that's watching over them, and all of us, all of the listeners and viewers and you and I included, right? So here we are, in today, moving on forward, just being present and carrying on with the well wishes. And that's really what we're here for today, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And just through like everything that's been going on, Sifu Lak wanted to not do a flickety flick today from the amazing book of The Art of Thinking Without Thinking, and but we've got a selected koan for you today, which I'll just pretend we flick to it. And it's page 226. And the koan is, I think, therefore I am.
Okay, good. So let me just share the picture for the viewers, and for the listeners, I'll describe what the artwork for this is. So this is a picture of the statue head of a Buddha, and in the background is these beautiful, bright, golden, shimmering lights, and then we've got the title, I think, therefore I am. So without much further ado, Mr. JT Jedi, what comes to you when I read that koan out to you?
Yeah, it's a interesting one. I think it's one of those ones with multiple layers. So when you come up with it, think, I think therefore I am. One of the first things that pops up is this question of who am I? What am I? And what are we consciously aware of? Because if we're thinking about things, then am I those things? How are those things coming about into my life? So it's about, for me, I think it's coming across as whatever you think about, you bring about kind of thing. That you are what you think. But it's like there's so many levels to it. Do you know what I mean? There's so many deeper levels to that one. So, but that's what initial thoughts that come up.
And it's an interesting starting point, because your starting point is thinking, right?
Yeah.
And if I was to kind of extend that, you said, who am I? What am I? But also you can add to that, how am I, why am I, when am I, right? And
Exactly.
the typical, hows and whys type questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, now these are all questions that are fair and well, to be frank. But firstly and foremost, there's that aspect of, have you ever asked this question or any of these questions of yourself? Who am I? I mean, that is a loaded question. I mean, loaded question. You can't get more loaded than that. What am I? I mean, what does a what mean? Right? But what am I? Yes, you're a human being. You might be male or female. You might have a different, your own kind of gender identity, however you describe yourself. How am I? How are you, to be what you are? Why am I? As in, why am I here, for instance? And when am I? As in, then that again, it becomes another loaded question, right? All of these questions are actually heavily loaded if you really kind of start to dig deep into these. And I mean, the whole idea of the podcast is to go deep and have that deep spiritual insight and philosophical insight into such questions. So the key thing,
where it takes us.
Eh?
And just explore where it takes us.
Exactly. Just explore where it takes us. But moreover, these koans have got a lesson in them. They have got an experience that they ultimately want you to experience and embody and then go out to and be that. But ultimately, all of these questions so far are about thinking. Okay, agree? Now, recently, we did a workshop, and this workshop was based on a dialogue between Bruce Lee and a Shaolin abbot in the limited edition version of Enter the Dragon. And I'm going to actually read this out so that you and all the listeners and all the viewers can hear this. Bruce Lee says, and he approaches his teacher and he says, "Teacher," and the Shaolin abbot turns around and he says, "I see your talents have gone beyond the mere physical level. Your skills are now at a point of spiritual insight. I have several questions. What is the highest technique you hope to achieve?" And Bruce Lee responds, "To have no technique." The Shaolin abbot turns around and says, "Very good. What are your thoughts when facing an opponent?" And Bruce Lee says, "There is no opponent." And the Shaolin abbot responds, "And why is that?" And Bruce Lee responds, "Because the word I does not exist." Now, interesting, right? The word I does not exist. So, there's lots of different layers of teaching here, right? Which I wanted to kind of unravel and unpack for our audience. First and foremost, this quote is based on the idea of mushin, or empty mind. Okay, and that means, especially when he says, and in reference to the statement, having no technique. In other words, when you're doing something, you're not thinking about doing it; it just happens. Okay, right? So it's an autonomous, intelligent response. Why? Because you programmed it through practice and perseverance over a prolonged period of time. That is already embedded and programmed into your unconscious, right, or your subconscious. It's second nature, right? So presented with a certain combative situation, bang, you know what to do. It just happens. You're not thinking about it at all, right? So number one is that the idea of mushin, or the empty mind. So no thinking. And then there's the flip side to that is, when you are thinking in combat, my favorite quote from Mike Tyson comes to mind, is that everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is that when you're thinking, you're now caught up in your critical faculty, and you become mechanical and robotized for a moment, right? And it can catch you, right? And all it takes is a blink of an eye to get knocked out, and all it takes is a blink of an eye to start thinking about something, right? So you can't allow yourself to think about a thing. You have to be completely empty. Mushin is the way, right? So that's number one, right? So there's an idea that you have to be empty, right, and clear, and just let whatever's inside you express itself naturally, autonomously, fluidly, right? Then there's a second element, right, which is where Bruce says, when he's responding, there is no opponent. The Shaolin abbot is saying, and why is that? And he's saying, well, the word I does not exist. So what does that mean? Well, this actually is the crux of today's podcast. And the idea for this being the crux of today's podcast is because, well, you obviously exist. So therefore, physically, you are in that moment. So technically, you can refer to yourself as, I am in that place and time and space then, right? Therefore, I do exist, right? Yes, physically, right? Physically, you do exist. But when you exist physically and you exist mentally, and you're caught physically and mentally in that moment, engaged with yourself and your self-identity and with your self-mind, right? That's when you're going to get punched in the face. Okay, we're already kind of alluded to that. So what is this I, or having no I, all about? Well, first and foremost, you get into the I, and you get into this, into your, your self-conscious mind and your conscious thinking through ego. All right. Now, ego is, if I was to put it in a combative sense, is the ego or the shame or the
identity around the situation, isn't it?
Yeah, the identity of, the shame of getting hit, right? So that your ego will get bruised, okay? So you don't want that to happen. So, you might be thinking about, how do I do this? And I can do this and that and the other thing. And this is how I'll beat my opponent. Okay. But when you're coming at it from an egocentric standpoint, you're caught up in yourself. When you're caught up in yourself, you can't see beyond you. Now, this is where combat becomes something beautiful. Yeah. And what I mean beautiful, actually, what combat is teaching us is that in order to get out of egocentricity, in order to get outside of the I, you need to become one with your opponent, right? In order to understand what they're thinking, right? What they're about to do, and so that you can respond intelligently with them. And in order to do that, you have to harmonize with them. How do you harmonize with them? Well, you need to learn to feel what they're feeling. Now, there's different ways of feeling. Now, we refer to feeling as kinesthetic, okay? Right? But if I was to say, have you ever felt someone's thought? Yeah, exactly, right? You can feel people think, right? You can feel it, right? Have you ever felt somebody about to move towards you, right? Especially in a combative sense. Yes, 100%. You can see it. But beyond seeing it, have you ever felt it without you being perceptually aware that they're about to do that? The answer to that is yes. Yes, you have, right? Even if the perceptual stimuli is there, sometimes you just get the feeling, all right, they're coming, right? You can't describe it any other way. You can't say, I saw them. You just get this sense, this feeling, right?
Yeah.
Then this is another aspect is, have you ever felt somebody's emotion, right? Exactly, right? So you can feel when somebody's sad. You can feel when somebody's welling up with rage. You can feel when somebody's about to explode. You can feel when someone's about to, go into a rampage.
Yeah, no, the scientists are even saying in regards to that we have these things called mirror neurons, which basically fire off the same part of your brain to the thing you're watching or viewing. So if somebody's laughing, the reason you could feel it is because your mirror neurons fire off as well. And even in like what you're saying in a combat mode, there's like those mirror neurons can kick off as well. So then you can feel like, okay, this is coming through, right?
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. I did not know that. I've always been, through experience, tried to cultivate sensory acuity on physical, mental, emotional, spiritual levels. Right? And what that has done for me over time is it's allowed me to feel what other people are feeling on all of those different 4 levels. Okay. And not knowing that there's a mirror neuron mechanism that's at work at the same time. And I know that you're aware of this, but Heart Lab did this whole experiment about your heart and your heart sending out signals and essentially,
right? It's like your heart is pulsating, and that vibrational frequency goes beyond you, and they're able to measure it.
Exactly, and what they found was that they could measure a let's just put it a magnetic field, right? That was up to 6 feet away, right, from the heart. Now that study was limited because the machine that they invented to measure the energy could only measure up to 6 feet. Okay, but I really believe that energy is infinite. And it will keep going. Okay. I mean, if just to put it another way, if you ever thought of somebody from your heart, right, that's on the other side of the globe, right, and they've called you straight away, that something's just happened there, right? And I'll put my hand up, and if the listeners and viewers have ever had that experience, put your hands up and just recognize the moments where something like that's happened. That you've got the power to communicate with people without telecommunications. In fact, this higher communication technology that's built within us, right?
So a story comes to mind, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
So I was at a personal development event, and we had an exercise going on where we were split into three people, and one person had to think of something that they've done in the past, and they had to go back into that state. They had to stand like that. They had to feel it. They had to just bring all that stuff into their mind, right? The second person had to copy them. So they don't know what it is. They don't know where they've gone or what's going on in their mind. They just had to look at them, copy them, and try to do what they're doing. And the third person viewing it was trying to match you so you would be exactly what they're seeing so you can match up with them. And we're doing this exercise, right? And I'm standing and copying and looking at this, and this image of kind of the blue sky, clouds kept on coming to my mind. And I said, it's parachuting, isn't it? And this girl that I'm working with, she's like, looks at me funny and just kind of says no initially. And I went, okay, let's carry on. And I went, nah, it's definitely parachuting. And she said, no, it's not. I said, what is it then? And she said, it's skydiving. But what was amazing was that, you could pick this up, like just being in the position. And I remember like Darren Brown doing something similar on TV where they had this room with a window kind of placed in front, and they had this room on the other side, and this guy was in one side and there was another person on the other side. That person on the other side had to again think of something, go back into this place, and they would just walk around the room or do whatever they're doing. And the person in this room had to do the same thing, just copy them, follow them, pick up the same objects, try to be in sync with them, right? Until they were like, what's coming up for you? And this person was doing it and came out with, look, somebody's birthday's coming up, a child, and this is happening, and described it. And the other person on the side was like, damn, that is accurate. So there is something to it with these like mirror neurons, this kind of energy flow, the vibration, something we could tap into. So this is being looked into at the moment.
Well, on this workshop that I spoke about, the theme of that workshop was exactly this: is there is no I, and one of the exercises we did was exactly that, and we didn't. What I asked the person mirroring was just to feel what the person was feeling, and actually we did it, and we did it dynamically as well. So I asked the driver, the person that had to get into a past memory and embody the emotional state at that time, whether it was either an up state emotion, a peak state emotion, or a low state emotion, right? And just walk, yeah, with the embodiment of that emotional state, and the person behind just had to follow and kind of feel what's going on. And I as an observation can guarantee you most people figured it out within 10 seconds or less. I'm going to say 5 seconds they were on it, right? And out of that group, something like 75% of that workshop group guessed it. Right. And it didn't, even if they weren't 100% on it, like, parachuting versus skydiving, it was that close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea being in combat, when you're, what I like to say, dancing with your opponent, the idea of dancing is to feel what they're feeling as you're moving around and just get into them. Right? Become one with what they're going through, one with what they're feeling. So when they're going to explode with an attack, you feel it before it's even arrived. Why? Because you feel it on a spiritual, emotional, and mental level before it translates into a physical expression, right? So you've got time to respond, right? Ahead, so you can stay ahead of it, right? But the idea is being one with that.
There's a wicked quote that comes to mind. I was reading a book. I think it was a book about aikido, and there was a section on there about the founder of aikido. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was a quote he used where I think somebody had asked him, like, when you go into combat, what's going on, what you're doing? And he said, thinking of the enemy as one, I do battle. That blew me away. Like, I was like, oh my goodness. Like, that's profound, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're talking about. There is no I, right? There's, if anything, there's an us. Yeah. And if there is no us, then there's no one. Okay. And you've got to start with no one, because you've got to empty everything out. Right. So there is nothing left. Only then for you to then assimilate the us. Right. And by feeling that, what that us feels like, by you feeling your partner, your opponent, or whoever it might be. And as one of the exercises, what we did was I had a professional salsa dance instructor come in. In fact, she's a professional dance instructor. She did loads of different types of dance, and she actually took us through an hour and a half salsa dance lesson, where in some parts of the dance, one partner had to keep their eyes closed, and that person was the follower, and they had to feel and respond appropriately. And there's certain kind of steps where the driver, usually the male, steps back, but pushes their hands forwards to indicate to the partner, the follower, that they should also step back at that time. And it's really amazing, because actually you start to connect with all your senses, your kinesthetic senses, to be able to start to respond automatically. So you could really kind of feel what they're about to do. So the idea being the driver puts you where they want to put you, based on their movement. And as you get better at dancing, then that, you can challenge your partner to mirror using more flair or more complicated motion and moves and so on. And it becomes a really beautiful thing. And this is what the point I was making about how actually when you start to realize the one, right? Or realize you as a one entity and gain that harmony, actually it starts to become very beautiful. Combat starts to become like a dance. It just happens to be that you might be throwing some strikes. But when you're one with your opponent, then you don't need to strike because you know what's going to happen, right? So you don't need to hurt your opponent technically, right?
No, it's amazing because a little while ago, and it's still kind of going on at the moment, I was doing interviews with experts around the concept of rapport. And one of the things that keeps popping up about rapport is that it's like a dance. You know, you're in motion, in sync with the other person. And that's like when we talk about rapport in that kind of context, we talk about conversation, building communication, relationships. So even in that scenario, there's this feeling element going on. And what we're saying is that in the combat state is kind of similar because there's a dance, a rhythm going on there as well. Yeah. So that's a really good way to connect the two things. That even though you got a combat situation and you got a relationship building situation, there's the same similar dynamic that actually takes place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other beautiful thing about dancing is there's no strikes, so there's no threat of getting hurt. Okay. You might get your foot stepped on.
Could that be the reason? Could that be the reason that okay, this might be a personal projection here, but could that be the reason that building rapport with people in that kind of context seems to be easier than when you're in a combat situation to be able to anticipate the punches coming in, because on one side there's a threat element or the other side seems safer. So there might be this stuff we're projecting, oh no, this could happen, that could happen, and therefore we don't see or feel what's coming through. Whereas on the relationship side, it's like you're in flow, you're a bit more jolly, you're going in conversation, so you just let it happen, isn't it?
100%. What that threat does, it makes people tense. Okay? Which actually is quite interesting because, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that whole dialogue between Bruce Lee and the Shaolin Abbot at the beginning of Enter the Dragon has got a little bit more to it. And I'd like to complete that bit. The Shaolin Abbot goes on and he says to Bruce Lee, he says, "So continue." And this is after Bruce has said, because the word I does not exist. So the Shaolin Abbot says, "So continue." And Bruce Lee responds, "A good fight should be like a small play, but played seriously. A good martial artist does not become tense, but ready, not thinking, yet not dreaming, ready for whatever may come. When the opponent expands, I contract. When he contracts, I expand. And when there is an opportunity, I do not hit, it hits all by itself." Now, the key thing there is there has to be an element of relaxation, right? But you have to be alert, aware, and prepared. Okay. So, Bruce always talked about this idea about firm relaxedness and relaxed firmness, right? In other words, don't be so firm that you're like concrete and rigid, but don't be so relaxed like you're like jelly, right? And all wobbly. And, if you move the plate quickly enough, you just, the jelly will just topple over. There's got to be a nice balance in between where you're firm enough, where you can move as a unit cohesively, but with fluidity and flexibility and mobility and speed. Okay. And that's where your dexterity and your graceful motion and your flow can be really expressed. So the key thing is that when you transcend getting into tune with your opponent's energy, only then we'll be able to feel when there's an opportunity to strike instinctively. Okay. And that is specifically without thinking or even trying. And that kind of reminds me of a famous quote by Yoda from Star Wars, where he states, "Do or do not, there is no try." So the key message being that whatever you're meant to do will just happen like that. Okay. Without you getting caught in, we were talking about, your egocentricity, right? And your conscious mind. Get rid of that, right? And just allow yourself to be as is, right? And
that's a very, very powerful state of being very present in the moment, isn't it? Because you can see it from when we used to watch Bruce Lee films. When he's in a fight stance, he's just there. like just weighing. I don't know. He's just in that moment, right? He just takes you somewhere that it's like, I don't know. He's tuning into what is about to happen. Then he's like happening before it even happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, for Bruce to do that on the screen, he took choreography to a whole new level. Not only did he try and demonstrate that he had martial artistry prowess, okay, but on top of that, he brought this subliminal, philosophical and spiritual aspect to his on-screen displays,
big time,
right? Which people feel, right? People are absolutely captured and magnetized and
just drawn into it, isn't it? Just
I was thinking about the word, when you're
magnetized.
No, not magnetized. It's when you're in a trance,
Yeah.
You're completely in this trance. And I think
hypnotic.
Hypnotic, that's the word. You're in a hypnotic state. Bruce did that. And I think the underlying emotions behind all of that is that Bruce was trying to convey something far greater than what can be explained through mere words. It has to be felt. And I would go as far as saying, and I surely have as well, experienced that hypnotism, right, through his on-screen displays, because he's trying to express something that's more than a physical choreography. Okay? It's emotional choreography, it's spiritual choreography. There's something far deeper than that going on there, and he's managed to do that. And that's, I think, the key to his brilliance, the key to his excellence. And I don't think I've ever really described that until this podcast. Having talked about the things that we talked about so far in this podcast.
I don't know if I shared with you. I remember hearing Bandler, who's one of the co-creators of NLP, talking about trances and hypnosis and stuff. And he was talking, he brought this analogy up. He's saying that the fighter in the deepest trance is the one that wins. All right. And the deepest trance is what we're talking about here, is because getting present is a trance state almost, it's being in the moment, like everything is just still and silent, where I think Bruce probably got to a stage where he was able to slow it down maybe, or anticipate it happening before it happens in real time. It's quite fascinating.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm so glad that you just said that, what you just said there. The last two things that you've just said about the Aikido instructor and Richard Bandler is really kind of talking truth to this key point here, though, this koan. And, I'd like to read the koan at this point, because the koan is going to become self-explanatory now, and you'll understand why we've been rabbiting on about all of this material and why I've kind of led this conversation down this path for a specific reason. Because quite often people find it hard to bridge the gap between physical martial arts and the spirituality in martial arts, and get caught up in, well, how can you be spiritual when physical martial arts is just violence? Well, the height of violence is controlled violence, and the height of controlled violence is love. Okay, because you do everything to avoid it and only fight for the things that you love. Okay, with reasonable force and conscious responsibility. Actually, before I read the koan, there is a little bit more that Bruce and the Shaolin Abbot talk about, which talks to that responsibility element. Well, the Shaolin Abbot goes on and he says, now you must remember the enemy only has images and illusions behind which he hides his true motives. Destroy the image and you will break the enemy. The it that you referred to is a powerful weapon easily misused by the martial artist who deserts his vows. For centuries now, the code of the Shaolin Temple has been preserved. Remember, the honor of our brotherhood has been held true. Tell me now the Shaolin commandment number 13. And Bruce Lee responds, a martial artist has to take responsibility for himself and accept the consequences of his own doing. There you have it. It's right there. Bruce wanted to teach philosophy. He wanted to teach spirituality in martial arts. He himself was still working on it. But that whole dialogue there was something that was scripted by Bruce. And he had it filmed, but in the original version, it wasn't aired. Okay, so they took it out because the American directors and producers at the time, they were like, our market is not ready for this, so they chopped it. But later on, people wanted to see more of Bruce, and they wanted to introduce any cohesive scenes that were filmed, and this was one of them. And actually, this was one where Bruce genuinely wanted to raise human consciousness through his movies, right? To break down barriers, especially at a time where, where he grew up during a time where he experienced a lot of racism and things like that. So he wanted to raise human consciousness, but used martial artistry as his tool set, as is ours, as part of this Martial Mind Power podcast. And, he finishes off this beautiful dialogue with him literally saying, you need to take ownership and responsibility for your actions. And for every action, there's a consequence. And every inaction, there's a consequence. So whatever you do or don't do, you have to be mindful of the consequences, right? So, and that kind of is a beautiful point in which you can take this to understand, actually, you know what, martial artistry, right, has got a direct connection with physicality and spirituality, and this is, you're starting to walk that bridge now. But when I read the koan next, you're going to actually it's going to gel even more. Okay, so let me, without much further ado, get onto that. And the koan reads, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Okay, so that's where the koan itself comes from. This generally has the effect of pointing a biased, conceited focus and attention on one's egocentric self, suggesting that whatever you think, you manifest and become. Napoleon Hill proved this in his lifetime of study, documented in his worldwide bestseller, Think and Grow Rich. Hill famously wrote, what you can conceive and believe, you can achieve. However, Descartes' quote originally came from Buddha himself and is quoted incorrectly because it is incomplete. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but it's incomplete. Buddha originally said, I think, therefore I am, but no thinker to be found. Descartes got stuck on the I, focusing attention on the self only, which has become a mantra for the West. And fortunately, is only half the lesson because it's only half the quote. Buddha's message was far bigger than that. Buddha was trying to help people understand that there are also thoughts that come to you without you thinking, and that you are not the one to create those thoughts. Half of all your thoughts come from outside of us. These are messages from a higher intelligence working through you, for you. And since there is no thinker to be found, Buddha was also trying to tell us that to receive these messages, we must stop thinking by calming our physical, mental, and spiritual faculties and allowing us to tune into the higher states of our consciousness. I mean, that koan itself talks to the title itself, The Art of Thinking Without Thinking. It literally is saying, don't think, okay? When you want to be present, allow you to express yourself naturally through your inner core.
And as that famous line from the film Enter Dragon, where Bruce Lee says to his student as well, right? When he tells him to look at the moon and he's pointing to the moon and the guy, and he says, don't look at the thing or you'll miss all the heavenly glory. right? And in that, when he's teaching it, there's an element there where just before that, where he says, don't think, feel.
Yeah.
It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't look at the finger, you can feel the heavenly glory, right?
So
I think I've messed that up, that quote.
No, but I think you've got the essence of it there, right? They don't think, feel, it's like a finger point to the moon. Don't focus on the finger or you'll miss all the heavenly glory. Okay. Just to put it the right way around. But ultimately, what, when you, let me give you an example, probably easy way to for everyone to kind of connect with this is that when you go to a job interview and you're really prescriptive and you've got your notes and you're really nervous and you read, you respond through all your prepped notes and everything, it's very mechanical. Okay. And generally people don't like that. Okay. Interviewers don't like that because they know you prepared it and you're robotized in that moment, right? They're not seeing the real you. Therefore, they're seeing a facade, right? They're seeing a prepared response. Okay. All right. And in an environment where, you've got something to refer to, you're not really responding naturally yourself. You're responding through premeditated, pre-documented responses. Okay. And at the same time pre-memorized. Okay.
Yeah. But it just reminded me of this funny story. So when you were sharing that, when you're talking about the job interview, I remember going to a job interview once and I was getting into the flow of the conversation. I think I had to do a bit of a presentation on the front or something. And then they did a bit of Q&A. And so obviously a bit nervous at first, then I got into it and I was in flow. And the guy said, have you seen our website? And it just came out. I just went, yeah, your website's rubbish, right? And then, that moment when you say something, I can't take that back. And he's like, oops. But the guy started to laugh. He laughed his head off, right? And the interviews there laughed their heads off as well. And then I got that job. And afterwards he told me, he said, that was actually really like honest and real. And that was one of the reasons we took you on. And I thought for a moment after I was thinking, right, there I was worried about what, and when I just, came naturally as to whatever came in flow, it did its job. No pun intended.
That's it. That's the point. You've nailed the point. That's the whole point, right? Just be yourself, right? Just be yourself. And to be yourself, as going back to that Yoda quote, do not, there is no try. Don't try in the moment where you want to be fluid and just be natural. There can't be any thinking involved. It's just you either got it or you don't. So it'll express if it's there or not express if it's not there. Okay. And if you feel that you need to develop your ability to express more, then go out and practice more, learn more, practice more, keep programming yourself to the point where it becomes second nature, right? This is why there's in martial arts, we talk about the 1,000, 10,000 rule, right? To practice a technique, so you get that technique, you've got to practice the technique perfectly 1,000 times, have 1,000 repetitions on it to make sure that technique is unconscious response, an intelligent response is second nature. You need to practice it 10,000 times. Now, everyone's different. So it may not necessarily be 1,000, 10,000. You might, a technique might be more natural to you. So you might only practice it 10 times and then 100 times, right? So, it depends on the individual. Other individuals, you could practice it 10,000 times and 100,000 times, you still ain't going to get it, right? Why? Because you ain't built that way, okay? You ain't got any interest in it. It doesn't feel right, so you just fuck it off, right? So you also got to be mindful of that. Are you good at it? Is this natural? Does it feel right? And if it doesn't, then it might not be for you, right? Especially if you're getting the right coaching, guidance, and teaching around it, and you're still not getting it. But if you're not getting all those points and you're just trying to learn it yourself, sometimes it helps to have the right teachers, the gurus, the mentors, and so on, to help you learn the things that you need to learn so you can get good at it. In the end, there's only so much learning that you can do on your own. That one of the best ways to learn is have a coach, a teacher, a guru, a mentor, or someone of that nature that will be able to guide you because they've already done it. Okay. And if you've got a teacher that is not qualified in the space that you want to learn, you won't go to that teacher. You'll go to another teacher. You won't go to a physics teacher to learn computer science, right? Why would you do that? They're a physics specialist.
And that's such a powerful thing as well, though, that thing about practice over time, because I mean, we were talking, you mentioned earlier on about like the spiritual and material, and just, you know, even myself got into a state where you're thinking, okay, spiritual and material, until I realized, hang on a minute, you can't separate the two. You can't separate spiritual and material. They work together hand in hand, right? And it was just coming to understand that this container, this body, as you grow, it's almost like a computer that you program things into. You have to learn, practice over time, right? And that's where I think about learn to unlearn comes in, because how would you know anything if you haven't learned it, right? And how can you get better at anything if you don't practice it? Yeah. And then you practice it so much, you get so good at it, it becomes second nature, because that's the way the brain works. It puts it in the program when you need it, because it's always trying to help you and solve problems. Yeah. And it's exactly what you're saying. Then you get to a stage where you don't have to think about it no more. You could just pull it out in the moment that's needed, you know? And that's what we're talking is. So we're not trying to say that you're just going to get this info and it's just going to happen by itself and you get present. No, you still have to put the energy and effort in. You still have to practice. That's why you have martial arts, to practice these things. That's why you do yoga over time, to practice these things. That's why you read over and over again to get better at it, because you have to put that programming into your material body so that you can then utilize it as a gateway for anything that comes through in a kind of spiritual format.
Exactly. And, you know, all of us are born with talents. But to cultivate those talents, so those talents are sharper, right? You have to work on them. Okay, and when I say you're born with certain talents, those talents are an inclination, a leaning, a bias, a natural draw towards something. Your calling, maybe even, right? But those things are the things that you're born with. You still have to work on it. I mean, I would say this was a calling. A calling to find Bruce Lee's martial art, calling to learn Bruce Lee's martial art. And even before I realized it had a name, he left the martial art behind. There was a whole legacy, an underworld legacy around that part. I did not know when I first had this calling waking up inside me saying, all right, you need to go find this, right? And then when I first found my first Jeet Kune Do class, I remember my Sifu teaching us footwork, and I felt like I had two left feet. I thought, how is everyone moving in this way? It's so unnatural. And I thought, I can't do this. And then I thought, all right, fuck it. I'll show up next time and see what happens. Showed up the next time. I still felt the same. But, you know, I like the class. I like the people in the class. My Sifu was amazing, right? And I just kept showing up. And then I just got better at it. And then, you know, several years later, you know, I dedicated 3 years to just do it and practice martial arts, Jeet Kune Do. Somewhere along the line, I started getting really good at it. And I didn't know when that was, but I just started getting really good at it. And that's when, you know, my Sifu, this was my second Sifu, started asking me to teach. I started to teach. He started to ask me to teach a bit more, Next thing you know, I'm doing 6 hours a week teaching for him. And I started to, you know, I was nervous. I wanted to be, you know, knowledgeable. And, you know, when you're a beginning instructor, you want to overshare because you want to show how much you know. And this is all coming from fear, right? Because you want to try and prove that, you know, you know what you know. And you're also learning because you're learning through the teacher position. But then what started to happen, and this is where things changed, is that people started to become inspired and motivated by the teachings I was giving them and how I was teaching them and how I was coaching them and how I was supporting them before, during, and after class. And people started coming to me with positive feedback and affirmations of great things that started happen in their life as a consequence of a class I taught, something I said. And that's when I realized, actually, you can have a really positive effect on people, and how leave a positive imprint in people's bodies, minds, emotions, spirits. And that was it. That's when it changed. That's when I realized that's why that calling happened. That was it. And I realized it was healing. It was healing people. It was healing people's bodies, minds, emotions, spirits, their lives, their work lives, their personal lives, okay, their business lives, right? It was setting people on their path. So just something to be aware of when it comes back to talents, right? If you've got a certain draw to a certain direction, listen to that, right? If you ignore it, you're ignoring your true higher self, your true authentic higher self. You ignore your true authentic higher self, you're going to live a substandard disintegrous life. And I say disintegrous because you're not going to be honoring the integrity, the reason you come on this planet. So right at the beginning, we talked about this one question, why am I? Or if I was to extend that, why am I here? Right? That's why. Okay, because you have a certain gravitar towards certain things, certain skills, certain trades, or whatever it might be, because that's where your talents are, right? And another kind of indicator to kind of discover where your talents are is whatever you do, right? No matter how hard it is, you still want to keep doing it, number one. And number two, you might be naturally good at it. And number three, it's easy. And if it's not initially easy, like it wasn't for me, there's a moment where bang, it all clicks into place and you're like, yeah. But so it's different for everyone. So if you're in any one of those boats, and there could be many other types of boats, but ultimately, you're the master of your boat, you're the captain of your own ship, right? You need to navigate that yourself. You need to also be aware of how you're navigating it, so that you're in tune with yourself, right? And you're in tune with which direction you're going to go in.
Exactly. And sometimes your biggest challenge in life, the biggest problem you've overcome it, so you can also then teach it to others and share it with others and tell other people how to overcome it. So your greatest challenge or weakness or perceived weakness or challenge could become your greatest skill, because you've gone through it yourself. You've and come out the other side. And then you can shortcut it, learn, put all your learnings together and teach and help other people through it as well. So, there's always something going on which can be utilized for the benefit of everyone else as well.
And let me give an example on that, right? So there's an amazing, wonderful lady called Louise Hay, right? Up until the age of 16, she was raped by one of her uncles, right? Repetitively, yeah? When she turned 16, she ran away from home, right? Absolute fucking wreck, yeah? Right? You can imagine a 16-year-old, poor 16-year-old, and some fuckwit raped her continuously, a family member. And actually, a lot of child abuse happens through a family member or a family friend, right? So just something to note to anyone that's got young children is, be careful who you let close to your kids, all right? So this poor young girl, really was traumatized. She left home. She ran away, right? And she had to kind of get on her feet and make something of herself, right? And it took her years. It took her absolute years. The outcome of that now is this. One of her most famous books is Love Yourself, right? Because she realized through all of that, the one lesson, the biggest lesson that she needed to learn was the art of how to love yourself, right? She went to write this book called Love Yourself, which became an instant bestseller. And it catapulted her to really power the personal development industry over in the States, and worldwide, and also launch her own publishing company called Hay House. Okay. Which is still going strong today. It did crash at one point, but she managed to pull it back, right? And it's going strong as far as I understand. My point being, it all started from that lesson that she needed to learn to love herself, because all she was taught was how to hate herself because of somebody else's actions and violations against her. Right? That is powerful. So if there is anybody out there that, you know, has really struggled with anything that's horrific like that, I just want you to know that sometimes there is a bigger lesson in it for you, and that is your lesson. And if you can transcend that lesson, you can truly embody that lesson. Guess what? You were made to teach that lesson and spread that healing out into the world, just like Louise Hay, right? She's a beautiful example of someone that really took that lesson and started to share that. But before she started to share that, she had to re-love herself, okay? And only then, when she had and was full of love, was she able to spread it out into the world, and in particular through her writings and the materials that she's sharing, and all the amazing personal development coaches and teachers and healers that work with her or on her publishing house list. So yeah, just something for you guys to think about, that, you know, we're all going through something, and it's important to kind of connect with your true, authentic, high self. And sometimes the lessons are not easy, right? Sometimes the lessons are not easy. And in fact, we're all going to suffer at some point. It's part of the human journey. And if there's anyone that hasn't really suffered in life, good for you. But I haven't met anyone that hasn't suffered in some way, shape, or form, right? No matter what household they're born into, whether you're born into royalty or whether you're born into a pauper's household, right? Doesn't matter, right? Everyone suffered at some point. Right? Can you learn the lesson? Can you embody the lesson? Can you share the lesson? As I say, once you've discovered your gift, you've got an obligation to give it away, right? So that part of it comes up again and again and again in many of the podcasts. Why? Because ultimately, whatever we're going through is related to why we're here. And that really answers the question, why am I? Or why am I here? But ultimately, I think, therefore I am, but no thinker to be found, right, is a slightly different lesson on the lines of to become present, to become in the flow, to become natural, to honestly express yourself. There is no thinking, just be. Yeah.
Exactly, man. Wow, Sifu Lak, I've had many, many insights in this one today. You know, there's a lot of connections happening in the brain. So thank you for sharing as always. I hope the viewers and listeners have found it useful as well. And I think on that note, you know, if that's of interest to you, again, the book is The Art of Thinking Without Thinking, available on Amazon. You can go to the website, martialmindpower.com. Get it, you know, you could pick it up any day, any moment, and read something inspiring and powerful, you know. And anything else before we close off, Sifu Lak?
I would like to say on the book, there are lots of different sections. Okay. So if you need a specific lesson or guidance in something that's happening in your life, then you can go to the contents page, and there's sections where let's just say you're overthinking things, okay, or you've got some limited beliefs, okay, well, you can go to the overcomplicate and limited mind section, okay. For instance, let's just say you're suffering from something, then you can go to suffering, samsara, and reincarnation section. Let's say you're having issues with love and trust, you can go to the love and trust section, right? And there's loads of sections. Honestly, there are so many sections. There's a section for money and wealth. right? If you're having problems with money, right? Or if you want to try and think about money a different way, for instance, right? If you're having, or you want further insights into self-discovery, right? And meditation, there's a section for meditation and self-discovery. If you're having issues with ego identity, egocentricity, issues with disrespect, right? There's a section for ego, respect, and illusion, right? For instance, and it goes on. There's so many sections in here that you can have a look at. There's far too many to mention. I must add, this book is 750 pages. Okay, so there's a lot of food for the body, the mind, emotion, and spirit there, right? So take one koan at a time, right? Because they're loaded, okay, and allow it to go deep in and sink in and body and really, really take that lesson, feel it, and then start to be it by doing it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Sifu Lak. And on that note, we'll be signing off. And then until next time, take care and see you later.